Welcome back to Crime Podcastle for episode 39 of our Unsolved Mystery series.
Oh, wow. Episode 39 already.
Time flies when you're diving into the dark side of history, right?
That's one way to put it.
But you know our listeners love it, and today we're taking them somewhere both beautiful and unsettling.
Beautiful and unsettling. That's an interesting combination.
It is, think, peaceful mountains, tranquil villages, and a string of unsolved murders.
Oh, wow. Okay, you've got my attention.
We're headed to Himachal Pradesh in the 1990s.
Himachal Pradesh, huh? I've always wanted to visit that region.
It is stunning, but this case, it really highlights how darkness can touch even the most idyllic places.
Yeah, you're right about that juxtaposition, peaceful scenery, and then suddenly you have a killer on the loose.
A killer who was never caught, which makes this case even more intriguing.
Unsolved mysteries always get to me. There's something about not knowing.
I agree. So let's paint the picture for our listeners. Himachal Pradesh in the 1990s. What was the vibe like?
Okay, so picture this towering Himalayan peaks, lush forests, quaint villages nestled in the foothills.
Sounds idyllic.
It was a place where people went to escape the hustle and bustle of city life, reconnect with nature.
True escape a haven.
Yeah, that's what makes this case so unsettling because it shatters that image of serenity.
When did things start to take a sinister turn?
Well, the shift seems to have begun around 1992.
Okay, early 90s.
Locals reported seeing a suspicious figure, someone who just didn't quite belong, lurking around trails and villages.
A stranger in paradise.
Exactly. And then came the disappearances.
Uh-oh.
Mainly young women and travelers venturing out alone.
That's when the fear starts to creep in.
Absolutely. It's like a crack in that peaceful facade.
What happened next?
Well, the disappearances turned into discoveries.
Discoveries.
Bodies started turning up in remote areas.
Oh, no.
And it was clear these weren't accidents.
So we're talking about murder.
Yes, the victims, primarily young women, showed signs of a violent struggle.
Making this even more terrifying.
And there was no indication of robbery, which makes the motive even more puzzling.
So you've got a string of seemingly random violent murders in a place that's supposed to be this haven. I can only imagine the pressure the police were under to solve this.
Yeah, you can imagine the weight on their shoulders.
What were their initial steps?
The investigation was immediately challenging.
I bet. How so?
Well, for one, the vast, rugged terrain of Himachal Pradesh made searching for clues incredibly difficult.
It's not like a city where everything is concentrated.
Exactly. Resources were limited and public fear was mounting.
It sounds like a nightmare scenario for any investigator.
It was a race against time with very little to go on.
Did they have any leads to follow?
There were a few individuals who caught the attention of the police early on.
Okay, tell me more.
They focused on a local man with a history of violence.
Okay, someone known to the police.
He was known to have conflicts with both locals and tourists, which made him a natural suspect.
A local with a temper that fits a certain profile?
Right. You look for patterns, and he seemed to fit the bill.
But was there anything concrete linking him to the murders?
That's where things get tricky. While his past behavior raised red flags.
Right, you can't ignore that.
And he couldn't provide a solid alibi for the times of the murders, the police couldn't find any direct evidence connecting him to the crime scenes.
Says.
No fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses placing him at the scene.
So dead end, at least for now.
Right. It's like hitting a wall.
Did any other suspects emerge?
As the investigation continued, another figure came into focus.
Okay, who is this?
A transient drifter who had been sighted near several of the crime scenes around the time of the murders.
Interesting, someone passing through.
Witnesses described him as having an unusual, almost unsettling demeanor.
Unsettling how so?
Just something about his presence, the way he carried himself, people found him unnerving.
That, coupled with his presence near the crime scenes, must have been a red flag.
Absolutely. His presence in those locations, coupled with his odd behavior, piqued the interest of the investigators.
A mysterious outsider passing through. It's practically ripped from a detective novel.
It does have that classic mystery element, doesn't it?
Did they manage to track him down?
They did, and he was brought in for questioning.
I bet that was tense.
However, just like with the local suspect, they couldn't find any physical evidence linking him to the crimes.
Another dead end?
He denied any involvement and was eventually released.
So two potential leads, but both lacking that crucial piece of evidence. I imagine that had to be frustrating for the investigators.
It was definitely a setback, and it fueled a growing sense of unease in the community.
Because the killer was still out there. A phantom moving through the shadows.
Exactly. The mystery deepened and the fear intensified.
Which is a perfect segue into the next part of our discussion. This case takes a turn toward the unexplained.
Oh, this is where it gets really interesting.
What can you tell our listeners about the more unconventional theories that emerged?
Well, as the investigation stalled and fear continued to grip the region, people started looking for explanations beyond the rational.
People trying to make sense of the senseless.
Exactly. Himachal Pradesh has a rich history of folklore and legends.
I can see where this is going.
And it wasn't long before those ancient beliefs began to intertwine with the case.
Okay, let's unpack this. What kind of supernatural theories were people talking about?
One of the most prevalent theories was that the killer wasn't human at all, but a vengeful spirit.
A ghost story in the mountains. It definitely adds another layer of creepiness to an already unsettling case.
It does. And the landscape itself lends itself to those kinds of stories. The remote trails, the dense forests, the mist-shrouded peaks.
It's like some kind of a gothic novel.
Exactly. It's easy to see how people's imaginations might run wild in that environment. And it wasn't just vengeful spirits, you know. The case also tapped into deeper anxieties rooted in the region's mythology.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What kind of mythological creatures are we talking about?
Some people, particularly in more remote villages, began speculating that the killer could be a Rakshasa.
A Rakshasa. For our listeners who might not be familiar with Indian mythology, can you explain what that is?
Sure. In Hindu mythology, a Rakshasa is a demonic being, often depicted as having a fearsome appearance and a taste for human flesh.
Oh, wow.
They're known for their strength, their cunning, and their ability to shapeshift.
So imagine the terror if you believe a supernatural predator, a literal demon, is stalking the mountains.
Exactly. It's a terrifying thought, and it speaks to the deep-seated fears that these unsolved murders tapped into. People were grasping for explanations for something to make sense of the chaos.
It makes you wonder how much of this was fueled by genuine belief versus fear taking on a life of its own, you know?
That's a fascinating question, and it's hard to say for sure. Fear has a way of amplifying everything. Sudden noises become footsteps, shadows become lurking figures.
I can see that happening.
It's easy to see how rational thought can give way to paranoia in those circumstances.
So we've got a vengeful spirit, a demonic entity. Did any other supernatural theories surface?
Some villagers claim to have seen strange lights in the sky around the time of the murders. Others reported hearing eerie chanting coming from the forests. These anecdotes, whether rooted in reality or simply the product of heightened anxiety, added to the growing sense of mystery and dread.
It's like the landscape itself becomes a character in this story, a source of both beauty and terror.
Precisely. And for a community so connected to their environment, that sense of unease must have been profound.
It's not just a crime that's been committed, it's a violation of their sacred space.
Exactly. It goes beyond the individual victims and impacts their entire worldview.
It's a chilling thought. So we have these supernatural theories swirling around, but what about the more grounded aspects of the investigation? Did the police ever explore other avenues, other potential motives?
They did, and it's important to note that not everyone in the community embraced the supernatural explanations. There were those who firmly believed that the killer was human, someone with a motive, however twisted it might be.
Which makes sense. There has to be a reason, right?
Right, so investigators looked into other possibilities.
What were some of the other theories that investigators considered?
Well, one line of thinking focused on the possibility of a personal vendetta.
Okay, someone with a grudge.
Perhaps the killer had a specific grudge against young women or travelers, targeting them for reasons known only to them.
A deeply personal, perhaps even obsessive motive.
It's a difficult theory to prove without a suspect, but it's certainly a possibility in cases like this.
Did they explore any other angles?
Another theory that emerged was the possibility of a thrill kill.
A thrill kill.
In this scenario, the killer is driven by a desire for power and control, deriving pleasure from the act of killing itself, rather than any specific animosity towards the victims.
That's a disturbing thought.
It is. And it's a difficult one to grapple with because it suggests a level of depravity that's hard to comprehend.
Did the investigators find any evidence to support this theory?
Unfortunately, no. And that's the frustrating thing about this case. There's very little to go on. No clear motive, no consistent pattern beyond the victims being young women and travelers, and no witnesses to the crimes themselves. It's like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
Which brings us back to the impact of these unsolved murders on the community. How did people cope with the fear, the uncertainty, the knowledge that the killer was still out there somewhere?
The impact was profound and long-lasting. People became more cautious, less trusting. Villages that were once open and welcoming became insular.
It's a stark reminder of how quickly a sense of security can be shattered, how violence can ripple outwards, affecting not just the immediate victims, but an entire community.
And it's a reminder that sometimes, even with the best efforts of law enforcement, there are cases that simply defy explanation.
So with the investigation stalled and the community on edge, the question remains, did the killings ever stop?
That's where the mystery deepens. The murders did cease as abruptly as they began adding another layer of complexity to an already perplexing case.
Okay, so the killings stop, the trail goes cold. What are the main theories that have persisted over the years?
Well, one theory is that the killer was indeed a local who simply stopped for reasons unknown. Perhaps they moved away, died, or were even imprisoned for unrelated crimes, putting an end to their reign of terror.
The hiding in plain sight theory? It makes sense, especially if the killer had deep roots in the community and knew the terrain well enough to evade capture.
Another possibility is that the killer was a transient drifter we discussed earlier, someone passing through, leaving no trace behind. Maybe they moved on to a different region, continuing their crimes elsewhere.
It's a chilling thought that this individual could have simply vanished into the vastness of India, their crimes left unsolved. And then there's the theory about a ritualistic group or cult.
Yes, that theory has always lingered, though concrete evidence remains elusive. The lack of a clear motive, the seemingly random selection of victims, it's fueled speculation about something more sinister at play, something beyond the realm of individual psychology.
It's almost Lovecraftian in a way, the idea of an ancient, malevolent force at work, something beyond human comprehension.
Exactly, and it taps into those primal fears about the unknown, the things that lurk just beyond the edges of our understanding.
So decades later, the case remains unsolved. The identity of the killer, their motives, their whereabouts, it's all a mystery. What are some of the common questions people still have about this case?
Well, one question that often comes up is whether the murders truly stopped or if they simply continued elsewhere undetected. It's a question that haunts investigators and true crime enthusiasts alike.
And what about the official investigation? Is it still considered an open case?
Technically, yes, but with the passage of time, the lack of new leads, and the dwindling number of witnesses, it's essentially become a cold case.
That has to be frustrating for anyone who wants closure, for the families of the victims who still deserve answers.
Absolutely, and it underscores the tragic reality that some crimes, no matter how horrific, may never be fully solved.
It's a sobering thought, and I imagine it's a thought that lingers in the minds of people visiting Himachal Pradesh today. Is the region considered safe for travelers now?
For the most part, yes, Himachal Pradesh has regained its reputation as a safe and beautiful destination. However, the shadow of these unsolved murders serves as a reminder that even in the most idyllic places, it's wise to take precautions, travel with a companion stick to well-traveled areas, and let someone know your itinerary.
Sound advice for any traveler really well.
Yeah.
This has been a truly fascinating, if unsettling, deep dive into the case of the Himachal Pradesh serial killer. It's a reminder that sometimes the most disturbing questions don't have easy answers.
It is, and it's a case that continues to intrigue and mystify, a testament to the enduring power of unsolved mysteries.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow and subscribe to CrimePod Castle for more explorations into the dark side of history and the mysteries that continue to haunt us until next time. Stay curious and stay safe.